Hello, I'm John Shavacco, the co-chair of the NY-GEO 2023 conference and a board member of the New York Geothermal Energy Organization. I'd like to welcome you to this recording of a live presentation from the conference, a two-day event which was held in Albany, New York on April 26th and 27th of 2023. This year's educational sessions and keynotes represent the latest in ground source heat pump system design, product innovations, and installation practices, along with important policy, regulatory, financing, and incentive updates. This presentation is one of over 40 sessions from the two-day event, all of which were recorded and available at NY-GEO's website, www.ny-geo.org, along with session descriptions and a link to download the slides from each of the sessions presented. NY-GEO is proud to make this content available to our members and other industry stakeholders, and if you are a member, thanks so much for your support and participation. If you find this content valuable and for some odd reason you are not yet a member, consider joining NY-GEO at the appropriate membership level with details available at our website. The live recording from the NY-GEO 2023 conference will start in just a moment. Thanks so much for listening.
So contrary to what your schedule says, this session is actually about financing and ownership models for community energy projects. As we all know, the foundational blocks of CLCPA are building efficiency, building electrification, renewable energy systems, and we can either do it in a piecemeal fashion, which as we have heard from other panels before is not the smart way to do it, or we can do it at a large-scale, community-wide energy project. So this session is going to actually address some of the questions about who owns these systems, who operates these systems, and who basically funds these systems. What are some of the financial and logistical challenges with implementing community energy projects, which are often multi-phased, multi-stakeholder projects, and can involve everything from building level improvements, whether it's weatherization or HVAC improvements, to large-scale distribution networks and thermal energy networks that are usually fed from, say, a geothermal system, a wastewater system, or any other number of heat sources and heat sinks, and oftentimes also overlaid with renewable energy, large-scale renewable energy systems. So I'm super happy to introduce our panel of experts here. So first off, we have Donovan from NYSERDA, and I'm just going to read a quick bio. Donovan is the Director of Clean Heating and Cooling at NYSERDA, and he is really the man right now in the state for community clean energy network projects. Every single project that you heard about during the conference today, he is part of those projects. From One Java to Steamboat to every other project in the state, he's deeply involved. He has an MBA from NYU Stern School of Business, and super happy to have you here, Donovan. Thank you. Next up, we'll have Shadrach, and Dylan Turek, who'll co-present. Shadrach is, can I just call you? Yeah, that's how I call you. Shad is the market lead for energy services at Siemens Industry. He is a Clarkson graduate, and he has over a decade of experience working in the K-12 municipal and higher education vertical markets. And Dylan is the director. He's a director of multiple different things. So mainly, he's the director of economic development for the city of Troy, as well as Troy Local Development Corporation and the industrial.
Just the director of economic development is a commission.
Okay, he's in charge of everything Troy, and he and he's actually a double grad from Albany, urban planning. So thank you, Dylan. And he, along with the commissioner of Troy, Steve Strickman, have really set out on this ambitious goal to make Troy the first municipally owned district energy system. And they'll be talking a little bit today about that. And then we have Jacob Goldman, who probably needs no introduction, but Jacob is the Vice President of Energy Tax Services, Savers, and he actually has both an engineering degree, chemical engineering degree from University of Buffalo, and an MBA degree from University of Maine. And what's interesting about Jacob is he tries to bring engineering and tax accounting together. So we'll hear some of his interesting perspective. And really the way this session is arranged is that each presenter will do a very quick summary of what they want to, what expertise they bring to the table. And we want to leave plenty of room, almost 30 minutes, for questions and answers. So please, as you're listening to their talk, think about the questions that you want to ask, knowing their expertise, and feel free to ask them. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Donovan.
Thank you very much, Indu. I'm going to start off by maybe saying something that.
Oh, you were already up, weren't you?
Yeah, I was already up there.
Kick me off.
I may say something that's probably a little disappointing right off the beginning. I said I'm involved in everything. I kind of am, but I'm not a financial expert, so don't take financial advice from me. I can take it from them. As far as who finances it and who owns it, I don't care. Just do it in a cost-effective way. So I start off with that. I am a state employee trying to do my best to achieve the state's ambitious carbon reduction goals of reaching 85% reduction in carbon emissions from my 1990 levels by 2050, which I hope I'm still alive by then, but we may be part of the geothermal system. But we're doing our part. So with that, I'll get into it. As far as financing community heat pump systems, and the relevancy I bring here now is that my focus is on clean thermal energy networks and running and developing the PON 4614, our community heat pump system. So that's the relevance here. But in terms of our view on financing these systems, it depends on the size, because it could be 2 large buildings, it could be 10, it could be a block or a community or a town. So it really, really varies. And as we see the low-hanging fruit, campuses. And again, it could be any debt financing, equity. We'll let the tax guy talk more about that. Government-owned buildings, they could do, use government bonds, and obviously privately owned buildings could be, again, private financing, commercial financing, ESCOs, and the like. So it really depends, right? But in terms of the different options that are available, this is not even all inclusive here that I'm putting down. Private equity financing. I will state that right now we're in the middle of a study with BDO Consulting, where they're doing a study on financing structures for thermal energy networks. And we're looking at various options. Some of it is included here. But we're looking at, let's say, real estate investment trusts. These some of the large, Lend-Lease at some point, they're considering flipping their big geothermal system into a REIT. Master limited partnerships, though that's the primary financing vehicle for the oil and gas industry. Let's take those billions and start applying it here. Maybe you can take a look at that. I'm forgetting your name. Morgan, we're going to come up with answers for you. Okay, my eyes, I can see this, but public-private financing partnerships. We're going to talk about that. I know my friends here at Troy, that's what we're looking at. Yes, commercial banks. I mean, we hear a lot of them going to Bank of America, just the usual suspects, right? ESCOs, I see energy as a service. I see that as a growing opportunity where that's third-party ownership moves it from a CapEx to an OpEx. A DOE loan office. I know NYSERDA is working very closely with Jigar Shah. With full disclosure, was formerly on NYSERDA's board, but that has no relevancy to what he's doing now. But just to disclose that. But they're looking to dispense or give some of these state agencies hundreds of millions of dollars for low interest loans in their communities. Green bonds, I think it was just approved recently. Our Green Bank. Here's the big one, which I know Jacob will talk about, tax credits, the IRA. That's really the big one. And state and local incentives and grants. I know in New York State, they have a tax credit on geothermal. That's for residential. We also have other types of incentives, and also, NYSERDA, what we do in our pond is de-risk it a little bit, but I wouldn't put that as part of your capital stack, because this is not something that's going to last forever, and it's not really a lot of money when you look at the big scope of things. So it's really now, what's the best capital stack for your particular project? And talking to all of these different providers. My goal right now is to attract the same kinds of investments that was made in the cable. That's a Freudian slip. That's my old life here coming back to me. The solar industry 10, 12 years ago with the PPAs, where we had these private equity firms putting billions of dollars into the marketplace. It hasn't happened in geothermal, and the main reason it never happened is because the commercial tax credit was 10%, when the solar tax credit was 30%. Well, now that's very different. So a lot of these same firms that have an appetite, a tax appetite, are now looking at these kinds of projects. So we're really trying to attract those. So that's sort of my summation here. We want the financing because we want these projects. And again, I think I didn't mention this part of it. NYSERDA's overall goal as it relates to thermal energy is to move from a building by building approach to a block by block and a neighborhood by neighborhood. We need to do this to scale. So whatever financial options gets us there, let's explore it and let's do it. The money's out there. We just have to have the right project and the right pitch. So with that, let's say thank you.
Who's up?
Thanks.
Thanks.
Front, back. Okay, I think I got this. You got it. How's everybody doing? My name's Dylan Turek. I'm with the City of Troy and the Local Development Corporation. If I go too fast, please tell me. I'll slow down. That's it. Okay, so I'm an economic developer, technically. I've got a background in urban planning and real estate development, and none of those things have really anything to do with geothermal. But intrinsically, I think that geothermal at the end of the day is really, it's more of an economic development program than it is about anything else. And I'd like to discuss who should own it, how you should finance it, and why it's an incredible opportunity for municipalities to get involved. And I think it would be absolutely criminal if we end up with ownership spread across the board, almost like the robber barons and the railroads back in the day. That didn't really work out too well for everybody. So I think it's important to think about potentially who's going to own these things, who's going to do the delivery, and how do you make it all work financially. So what you're looking at here, I believe, what you're looking at is basically a bore field in Riverfront Park, which is right along the Hudson River in Troy, New York, in downtown Troy. The building that's sort of colored there is One Monument Square. It's a project that really sort of gave birth to this idea of doing a district geothermal system a couple of years ago. We've been working with Donovan on this probably for 4 years at this point. It's been sort of something that's been in the works, and we're really, really excited to actually have this ready to go into the ground as these sort of programs are coming out. So we were in a really good position to start with. So in any case, this is sort of our overall plan. Forget about the 1A and 1B phases. That stuff's like ridiculous. So in any case, we've got 4 phases here that you're looking at. 1A, which is really just one, is going to be a 200 well bore field. It's going to deliver about 400,000 square feet of heating and cooling total. It's utilizing about 500 feet we're drilling down to, just about, whatever the limit is. 499. Yeah, exactly, 499.5 and 3/4. And then you're also looking at phase 2, which is really 1B. It involves a mixed income housing site that we're also developing along with the Troy Housing Authority and Penrose Development. So that also gives us a really good anchor. And we're going to be utilizing both a combination of Troy Housing Authority land, potentially Russell Sage College land as well, and then City of Troy land. And then if you look further to the south, which is page right that way, that's all brownfields at the moment, and it's old industrial land that we actually have the opportunity through a brownfield opportunity area program and also through the EPA's cleanup program to basically get in the ground, to get ready all of that for development, but then to put all this infrastructure into the ground first, so that when we do the development, all this new construction, we can actually do like a master planned city, little neighborhood within a city that's sort of a city of the future, whatever you want to call it, but the whole thing can then be net zero. And so all of this is really exciting for us because, again, it's an economic development opportunity for us. Again, this is phase one, right? This is beginning this year. Right, Donovan? I think it's beginning this year. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Phase two should be beginning next year. And the rest of it's just backups because we want to leave time for questions. In any case, the basic gist of the ownership model, just so you have it, is that the city of Troy can't actually own it because we can't bond for it. And we can get into all of this because when you have one customer, technically it's like a privately owned system. You're basically delivering to one person. So it's like the first person with a telephone. You're kind of screwed at that point. So in any case, the LDC can step in though, and they can actually do this. They can bond for it, and they can also technically lease land from a private landowner to extract basically, GEO assets out of somebody's privately owned land as well. So it's sort of the perfect vehicle for it. And then we're very fortunate to work with Owen and his team over at National Grid because our hope, it's in the U10 application at least, is that we'll get selected and then they'll be able to do the delivery for us, which is something they do now currently as a gas company. They have that expertise. They have the ability to finance these things over a longer period of time than we ever could. And we think that together, all that really does is take the production away from whoever was producing using gas-fired plants and other things like that, just diverting it now to the municipality so that we can then invest that money back into the community and also help create jobs. We can also do workforce development programs and then help doing the retrofits to all the buildings that we're obviously going to have to do in order for this to work out. We're a very historic city. If you've seen that show, Gilded Age, I haven't watched it, but I heard it's pretty terrible. But in any case, if you've seen that show, that's where it's filmed. It's filmed in Troy. So it's a beautiful old city. And with that, I'll wait for questions.
So the big question with community is who gets the credit? And so at the end of the day, it's the economic owner of the eligible equipment. You can bifurcate your project. So the economic owner of the wells, for example, is one party, and the owner of the building is another party. Both of them can get credits on the equipment that they're economic owners for. So it comes down to who's the economic owner of that equipment. Said another way, who is depreciating that asset on their books? So in general, it all kind of boils down to operating lease versus capital lease. And operating lease is more like a rental. You're renting something from somebody, and so then the financier gets the tax credit. Capital lease, traditionally the capital lease could be from the building owner's perspective, then the building owner would get it in a capital lease. So operating lease, capital lease, that defines. Now, there is one thing that you kind of need to avoid. It's called limited use. And, I'm a tax expert. This is kind of a entity creation type thing, but the way it says, Company A owns the limited use property that has been installed on the premises of Company B. In that case, Company B gets the credit if it's just one. But if you're selling to multiple parties and you're on multiple people's lands, then you're okay. There is no limited use. It's not just limited between two parties. So the first question is, who gets the credit? Okay. And so what are your tools now? You have this tax credit. You could get direct pay, and we'll talk about that. And you could transfer it as well. So if everybody could reach under your seats right now, if you could reach under your seats, it's my Oprah moment here. You get a tax credit, you get a tax credit, you get a tax credit. Everybody gets a tax credit. Direct pay. If you are not-for-profit, any not-for-profits here? If you're a not-for-profit, you get a tax credit. Any state or local? State and local? You get a tax credit. Any federal? No tax credit. There's no tax credit for federal, but state and local and subdivisions thereof, they can get a tax credit. It's all because of 6417. Now, 6417 has a couple of haircuts. So the first haircut is a 10% haircut. To avoid that, you could either be a small project, you could start your project before 2024, or you meet domestic content. Then you don't have to haircut your tax credit, okay? So that's the first haircut. The second haircut, I heard bonds. People were talking about bonds. There is a haircut for using tax-exempt bonds. It's a very complicated calculation, at least the way it's written up. There's gonna be guidance. You're gonna hear me say this all throughout the conference. I'm speaking tomorrow as well. We have to wait for guidance. But at worst, it's a 15% haircut. So there is a possibility of a 10% haircut. There's a possibility of a 15% haircut. Okay. How many tax-paying entities are in the room? You get a tax credit. Okay. But also, let's say you didn't owe taxes. You can sell your tax credit. Okay. Section 6418 allows you to sell your tax credit. So you could take it yourself. If you have tax liability, to take a tax credit, you have to owe taxes to get a tax credit. So if for some reason you don't owe taxes, you can sell your tax credit. And what I have up there, Energy Tax Savers was thinking about being one of the names on that board, but then we found all these other names on the board, so we decided not to create a platform. There are 5 companies that we know of pursuing a trading platform for tax credits. Those are the names of those companies. So at some point, none of them are operational. More than likely they'll be operational next spring. But that's where you're going to want to go to sell your tax credits. One of those 5 companies is going to be, maybe 2 will be the winner, maybe 1 will be the winner, but we didn't want to get into that battle. Anybody name a tax entity that doesn't pay taxes typically? It was mentioned earlier. Close. No, that's not for profit. REITs, real estate investment trusts, they don't pay taxes. So traditionally, REITs didn't do these type of projects. And so now they're going to be able to sell their tax credits. And so this is going to blow up energy efficiency, ground source, solar, all those technologies. So who thinks the credit for geothermal went up from 10%? You're all wrong. It actually went down. It's a 6% credit. Don't forget that. It is a 6% credit. Your 10% credit turned into a 6% credit. The credit went down. But there's a whole bunch of ways to get bonuses. So there's a domestic content bonus that gets you 2%. There's a 5-time bonus that takes your 6 times 5, turns into 30%. There's also an energy community bonus. You can stack them up. You can do domestic content and energy community. And you mentioned brownfields. Yep. You could get an energy community bonus for the brownfield project. 5-time bonus, 3 ways to get the 5-time bonus. I'm running out of time. Okay. First way is by being a small project. We have a lot of ground source geothermal. How many megawatts was the last project you installed? Anybody? How many megawatts? Geothermal is not measured in megawatts. But clearly the people in Congress, they live in a solar wind world, so they put small projects as 1 megawatt. So what I can tell you today is that 284 tons equals 1 megawatt in one calculation. And so I can defend you taking anything less than 284 tons, you can get the 5-time bonus. There is some lobbying of the IRS for 445 tons. I will defend you to the death, and we will use those arguments if you want to go there, but I'm going to be there with you, not separate from you. You're going to go hand in hand with me on that argument until that wins, 445. It could win. But I can definitively say 284 is good. You could have anybody have started their projects before January 29th? Okay, well, that's too bad. You would have gotten the 5-time bonus. So the last way, if you have these community projects are most of them are much bigger. Yours is much bigger than 284 tons, I would say. So prevailing wage and apprenticeship. The rules for prevailing wage and apprenticeship have come out. There's going to be additional rules, but they have come out already. It's 2022-61. Domestic content bonus. 100% of the cost of steel and iron and 40% of the manufactured product have to be in the U.S., made in the USA. Now, lots of ground source is manufactured here in the United States. So then you just need your steel and your iron on the project to be 100% U.S., and you're good. You're going to get this bonus, either 2% or 10% if you meet the 5-time bonus. Energy community. So brownfields qualify for energy community. I always call it the Joe Manchin bonus. The first one, census tract or adjoining census tract with a coal mine closed. Census tract or adjoining census tract with coal-fired plant. Anybody from the Tonawanda area? Here's the map. Okay, there was a coal plant in Tonawanda that was closed, and you really can't see it, but there's that orange level right there, and then all these other orange places. Obviously, down here in Pennsylvania, these are all coal mines, but these are closed coal plants. And if your project is in these areas, you get the bonus. You get the energy community bonus. The blue area. So this is the official map. If you want to, everybody, please write that down very quickly. You write it down? Okay. So that's the website. That's the official IRS website. But it's really not official. It's only official for these orange and tan. It's not official for the blue. The blue is where 0.17% of coal, oil, natural gas employment occurs, and higher than average unemployment. They haven't added the higher than average unemployment yet. So this blue is just places where 0.17% exists. In May, they're going to add the higher than average unemployment. If this is a place where employment is good, this is going to disappear from the map. It's not going to be blue anymore. If unfortunately those areas have high unemployment, then it's going to stay blue. And if you do a project, it stays blue for a year, May to May. So it stays blue. If you start your project in that May to May time frame, you're locked in for that bonus for the whole time. Okay? This is me. If you want, I have some YouTubes, and go to my website or send my email, and I'm glad to talk to you.
Thank you so much. That was perfect. So as promised, our panel has done a really good job of providing a really brief overview of the stuff that they're working on and their expertise. So I'm now happy to open it up for questions. Matt, am I?
We'll tag team.
Okay, I just have a question about your one of the phases on your project for Troy. You're on the river. Why in the world would you drill when you're on surface water? Why would you not just draw from the surface water? I mean, it just seems such a waste to drill down when you had such great access.
I think we all agree. You should talk to DEC for us. That would be fantastic.
Right? Why are they so hard to work with?
It's new. It's new for a lot of people. It's not going to be very easy. And like everybody else, we're going through things for the first time. And so DEC is now facing this for the first time as well. I'm sure that there's conversations going on right now about this, but for the time being, we can't go into the water.
Donovan, how do we get DEC to realize that utilizing surface water, I mean, Toronto drinking water, Toronto's been doing this forever. How do we get DEC to realize that utilizing surface water for a geothermal project is not new? This is something that's been going on for years.
They're well aware. It's just a matter of them coming to terms with it and approving it. But we've been talking to them for years. I wish I had that answer for you, Christy.
Can I just interrupt there? We're talking about heating and cooling the surface water, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
All the projects where people put a geothermal system in there for heating out of a river failed. And there's a reason for that. Let's put it this way. The river, by definition, is just about at freezing temperature, 32 degrees. In order to draw temperature out of it, you need to put a heat exchanger in the river, which is less than 32 degrees, but you don't have antifreeze in that water. What do you think is going to happen? Well, there's a difference between a river and a pond. Pond stratifies. A river, by definition, you put a thermometer in a river, in the middle of the winter, it's runoff of the snowmelt, that river is at 32 degrees or less. Surface water, a pond, is stratified. The warmest water is actually at the bottom of it, because by definition, the densest water is 39 degrees. It's the heaviest. Water is the only element which has actually a higher density and a higher specific weight at above freezing temperature. That's why the fish in the ocean, that's why the bottom of the ocean never freezes, one of the reasons. So actually it's always by definition 39 degrees on the bottom of a pond and you can extract heat out of it. You're trying to extract heat out of a 32-degree river, which is off the runoff from the snowmelt. What will happen is this will freeze right on the outside of your heat exchanger. That's why every single system where we're trying to put something in the river to extract heat out of it has, I don't know a single one working.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much. Thank you
Just
for
want to
coming
be
out.
clarifying, and we're asking questions and we're saying, hey, why isn't that the DEC? I'm actually glad that they're holding things up.
Very good. Did you? If you can just wait till the, so I think there was a question here that it gets. Yeah, do you have a question? No.
Not anymore.
But no, she's correct. Excuse me, can you hear me? She's correct saying that there's a disconnect between NYSERDA, Irving 4, which is Con Ed, it's advocating energy savings with new technology, for instance, CO2, ammonia, which actually was used in New York City a long time ago, now it's coming back, and the authorities that give you permits to do your construction or your installations, like DEC, like NYC DEP, we're from New York City, FDNY. So how do we bridge the gap? Even Con Ed amongst themselves, Con Ed 4 Irving can't do anything with the Rye, New York office to get meters installed.
I mean, I
So
think
there's a
we're really
practical,
getting off on
there's a
it.
practical
Yes.
aspect to what she's saying.
Yes, but-
It's nice to have great ideas, but you have to put them into place. All these ideas
I
are great. It's
appreciate
whether or not
these
you can
questions.
execute.
I think we're kind of getting off the tangent.
Okay,
so
sorry.
if we can ask
Apologize.
specific questions that utilizes the panel, that would be awesome.
Sir in the orange.
Bart Church from Aztec.
Folks, there are lots of great ideas out there, and we're exploring all of them. And Troy explored that. There are other projects that within our pond that have explored it as well, and actually came up with the same conclusion that Jens just did, that it will freeze the river. So we're just looking at the options and exploring what's best. But there are lots of ideas. That just doesn't mean that because they're next to a river that's the best one.
My question is for Dylan. Can you say a little bit more about who owns what in your project? Because I think it was Community Development Corporation that owns part of it, the city owns part, utility owns. Say more about the win, how each owner wins in that in the system.
I didn't say everybody wins, but no. So, and this is going to get kind of crazy, so just bear with me for a second. Originally, when we were looking at this, we had a publicly owned park, right? So the city owns the park. We wanted to help service one building that was going to be privately. It was going to be a P3 partnership. That's what we really focused on. And it became pretty obvious, obviously, that you can't just take a park, drill it, and then give the energy to a private owner. So as we were looking at this, we said, let's do a district system. The city was sort of behind it, I guess. They were like, yeah, we could look at this. It's kind of cute. And then when it came time to actually look at it doing a GEO bond, which is how the city pays for everything, we went to our very conservative bond counsel and said, hey, we're going to try to do this utility. You guys want to get down on this? And he was like, nope, you can't do this. So it became pretty clear that GEO bonds won't work for anybody, at least according to our attorney. So we said, okay, that's fine. Why don't we take a look at doing it through the LDC, which is the Local Development Corporation. That's an EDO, an economic development organization. I don't know what my badge says. I think it says, this is actually a mashup of two different organizations, but that's okay. So what we can do with the LDC essentially is own it. We can lease from the city the subterranean rights. Good luck finding somebody in New York State who can assess that, though. And then we had to basically get this crazy legislation. My boss is back there in the arm sling, sorry. It's from punching a guy over this. No, I'm joking. In any case, so he basically had to work on some legislation that was all about basically alienation, because nobody knew how to deal with this from the state. So they said to us, okay, you're gonna have to do alienation, which basically means you have to give back parkland even though it's below the parkland, and we're not actually altering anybody's ability to do anything above the park. If anything, we're actually restoring a parking lot to a park, but they still wanted alienation stuff. So the LDC is gonna basically own the system itself that does the production, all the wells up to a pump. And then from that pump, Owen and the fine people over at National Grid, hopefully, will be able to take it. It's going to be an ambient loop, and then do the delivery into a pump room, right? And then through their existing easements, run the delivery throughout the loop where the first phase is, and then back again towards our pumps for recharge. And essentially, they'll be the customer-facing sort of entity. So we have one off-taker, which will be National Grid, and they'll help pay our debt service and whatever the operating costs are. And that basically ends up going back into us to pay debt service, and then we have to give a lease to the city. So it sort of trickles back down to the city eventually, at least some of the money. And the more we do this, obviously the more lucrative it gets for everybody. And this was something that was discussed in another panel as well. I thought was really spot on. The first one is the hardest one to get done. If you can get the first one done, you can go from there. Yeah, so Donovan's right next to us. He can answer some of that. And then again, so if you try to go out right now and tell people, hey, we want to do a geothermal system, would you like to be an off-taker? They're going to look at you like you're fucking nuts, because do you have anything to point to? No, you've got nothing. You're like, hey, I swear we're going to build this thing, and I know you have to retrofit your building, but within 2 years, I promise we're going to have geothermal. They're like, no, we're not going to do that. So you can't finance this, because a bank also, by the way, doesn't want to own a bunch of pipes in the ground that they have no access to. Like, what are they going to do with it? It's not collateral for them. So you're going to find it's very hard to finance it. The only way to finance it is to have money promised to you from a National Grid type person, who then, that backup will basically, some sort of contract that will allow you to say, look, we're guaranteed to get this payment that's going to cover our debt service, and as a result, then they lend you the money. And so that's why you can't own everything. You can't own both delivery and production. Does that help? I'm sorry.
So the money for the bore fields came, who wrote the check? Or who's going to write the check?
It'll be through a lease agreement with a third party. So as a lender in this process, we'd like to participate. And so, not since COVID and somebody sneezed, did people run away when you don't have a guarantee to repay a debt service, right? So companies like mine, we want to provide lending services towards this. The problem is, unless we have a guaranteed backer, it's hard to get in a transaction with somebody, because we can't take our bore fields and go home if they don't repay the debt service, right? So it's a struggle. We're not there yet, but the plan will be to use one of the financing options for this that Donovan mentioned earlier.
Hey, Shad, can you take this moment to talk a little bit about Siemens' role in this project?
Yeah, so it basically, our role is the construction partner in this process. In development, design, and funding of this was our goal. And as Dylan kind of pointed out, we hit every roadblock you can possibly imagine through the process. And I think the reality is we had great partners that we started bringing on, more so through luck and persistence than having a really good plan. And I think it was good. So, but no, I think it was kickstarted with looking at this piece of property that was ideal for putting bore fields in and going through it. So, but our role really was we fronted a lot of the upfront funding for the design piece to ensure that it was a viable project, so it becomes shovel ready, so we can proceed forward here once we get into final contracts.
What's the incentive for the private building owners to connect to the system?
I'll hand it to the tax guy. You mean beyond like you mean like why would they do it, basically, right? So we could lie and promise that the bills are going to be lower, but the reality is we don't really know that at the moment. We don't really know what the bills are going to be, right? So there's a couple of reasons. One, there are a number of incentives to help make that work, but the reality is some of these buildings are so old they need way more than just a system put in place, right? They need like a ton of weatherization. They need a lot of things, and this is where, unfortunately, the bad news is that we can't continue to do this work without some government help. Like, you know, the first set of gas lines that were put in, all these different things that have happened have always been with the help to get started with government help. And there's a lot of people who've got a $100,000 home, you know, it's assessed at a $100,000 home, it's got leaky windows, leaky roof, all this different stuff. They can put a heat pump in there, it's not gonna do anything. They're gonna be really miserable and cold. And then they might spend $50,000 doing all that work, and their house is worth $105,000 when they're done. Like, it's not gonna, that math doesn't work out. So, you know, anybody that tells you that they have it solved, I think is probably lying, unless they have money from the government to basically help make it work.
Before we pass it on to another question, I'm wondering if Donovan and Jacob, if you can add some color to that answer in terms of, like, yes, there might not be financial benefit, but are there incentives out there? Like, is now the good time for a homeowner to be doing these things?
Well, as I mentioned before, the economic owner of the equipment So in this particular case, my guess is the building owner has some equipment that they have to purchase, and they would be the economic owner of it. It'd be using the ground or groundwater, in this case the ground, for heating and cooling energy, and therefore that equipment and the installation costs and the design costs is eligible for these tax credits that we've been talking about from the Inflation Reduction Act.
And then Donovan, if you can address the role of government, like, you know, Dylan mentioned early assistance, but at some point you want to get out of the game, right? So how does that transition look?
As quickly as possible. No, well, well, we want to de-risk it. I mean, we want to move it forward. We don't, I mean, these are ratepayers. We're funded by ratepayers, so they can't bear the full burden of this, right? But we need to get it going. So we created this pond, 4614, to provide support for feasibility studies, detailed design, and then support for construction. But it's limited funding. So we just want, and it was a pilot project, which has been super successful. Once we prove the success of this, that's when what I talked about in my opening remarks is now we want the private sector to come in and really invest the real money to make this work. I'll just say we need a capitalist solution for this. We need real risk capital, investment capital coming into this to take it to where we really wanted to take it. So we'll do our part to get it started, but we just want to give you the push, give you the nudge, and you guys take it from there.
Yeah, and I think the developers in Troy and others were always very interested in this, and I think now that it's become real, we're engaged heavily on the demand side improvements in their facilities, and now we're doing the analysis on what's the real benefit of geothermal financially, right? That's going to be the next sell that we have to do. But at the end of the day, they need to do these upgrades regardless of whether or not it's geothermal because of the aging infrastructure that they have.
And I just wanted to add a couple of clarifying sort of thoughts to what I said earlier. The tax credit's great, but it has to actually cover the gap between what you would, if you say you're at the end of your useful life of your existing equipment, you have to basically cover the gap of what it would cost to get the same thing you currently have, say a gas boiler, versus what you would be putting in, say, the district geothermal system or a heat pump that works with it. And that's the only time that you're going to say yes to that, unless there's additional incentives. The one thing to mention, and this was mentioned before in a great panel that I heard a little bit earlier today, which is spot on, is that there's going to be a point of inflection basically where as more people do this, the cost starts to go down, right? And then the cost goes up the other way on gas because there's less people basically helping that. So you have to sort of combine those two rate cases, and I know this is nothing new for a lot of people in this room, but I think that's one way to sort of do this. The other piece of it, and I don't like to say anything about utilities when our partners are in the room, but I think at some point the utilities are going to need customers, and if they're being basically ordered to get off of natural gas, then we're all kind of in the same situation together, which is that think about all the people that are going to get hired to redo these houses, right, to do this work. Think about all the people that are going to get hired to do the drilling, all the people that are going to get hired to do the HVAC install, and then the maintenance of all these things. It's a huge economic development opportunity, and that's how I look at it. I don't really necessarily look at it. I've got 2 little kids. Obviously, I care about the environment a lot, but at the same time, there's a lot of people who are underemployed in my city, and I know for a fact that we've got people who are ready to jump on workforce development programs for a lot of these people. That return and the secondary, tertiary benefits of lifting up the incomes of all the people in your city is tremendous. Think about the Adirondacks. I mean, there's been no industry in some of these places. That's why municipalities have to get involved in this, and they can't just let, again, the National Grid or another utility own everything because they're going to be missing out. They might get a little lease payment here and there. No, they should be involved in it, work on the production, and then work out or deal with with your utility so that they do the delivery. That's a perfect partnership, at least as far as I see it, and that can help you get that work done. Maybe you could set up a revolving loan fund, for instance. There's a lot of different ways to do it that way.
Hello, my name is Sean Helson from Halco Energy. Our company does a lot of residential scale geothermal systems, and something I hear from customers a lot is, they're not going to be in their home for the next 20, 30 years to pay off a system. And it seems like a lot of the incentives are oriented towards the person who's purchasing the equipment, and then translating that to potentially a future owner. It's hard for the existing customer to justify the purchase of saying, if it's going to cost somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000, I'm not going to see that payback on my system in the next 10 years. So is there any incentives available for a future buyer, whether it's a lower interest mortgage rate, whether it's a different mortgage interest tax deduction, those kinds of things, so that it incentivizes a future buyer to pay a slightly higher price for that home, to give an existing customer the chance to be willing to lay out the money needed.
Well, no incentives like that exists, and nothing that I know of is in the works. But this is where I think Jake would talk about the limited use. If they can get beyond that and get some relief like the solar industry was able to do, then you can have third-party ownership, and that transfers to new owners. So that's the way to solve that problem.
So are any of you able to address that, like with the community solar, for example, right? I don't have to put a rooftop solar on my house. I can take advantage of this community solar, and they get all the tax credits and the incentives. Do you foresee a model like that for building level work that needs to happen? And how that might be structured?
Well, one of my dreams is to create a thermal distributor. That's what they do. Just like we have the electric generators, and gas utility just pumps gas that's coming in from Texas and other places. So if we can create another business, although, yes, utilities are now allowed to vertically integrate with thermal energy networks, which is fine. But if an investor wants to come to a Troy or a big city and say, I'll invest and own the loop fields, and I'll do this, and I'll pay you, the lease for the land or whatever, you're welcome. Let's talk about that.
I love you, Donovan, but I totally disagree. Because there are people who might show up then just speculatively own land, or they might just purchase land just to own it for some potentiality of maybe making money down the line with loops. Then you also have 25, 30 different owners and 1 square mile of different systems. I mean, National Grid's gonna have to manage all that, or whoever the delivery person is gonna have to manage all that. It gets really convoluted and sort of difficult, and then how are you gonna keep people honest when it comes to that? Like, all of a sudden you're gonna be in a bidding war to get whoever can get the energy for less. It's just gonna drive down it doesn't make sense to me when, again, there's a perfectly fine situation, which is you can just give it to us, and it makes sense.
I love you too, Dylan. But, competition works, in my view. And yeah, there has to be some regulation. There has to be oversight. There has to be standards in which they're built to, where you can connect down the road. I mean, that's what happened with a lot of utilities. They consolidated Edison. They bought up a bunch of utilities and became one big one. So that's kind of the vision, where we can have lots of people building these things to a standard that can be interconnected down the road to become one big one. So yeah, it's not just, the Wild West, but there has to be some regulation, oversight, and standards. And codes. I mean, we're working on codes and standards now.
Jacob, the IRA specifically calls out geothermal and geo exchange with respect to the credits. Do you have any insight on sewer water heat exchange and whether that falls within the IRA?
So people have asked me that, and until IRS guidance says something different, I think the law, unfortunately, reading the law, I don't think I can get to sewer water being groundwater. If I can get to sewer water being groundwater, we're there. But unfortunately, there is no methodology there. I'm trying to think back. I investigated this a couple months ago, and I think I did find somewhat of a solution. Give me your email address and remind me what the question is, and I'll see if I can look up what I found. And there might be like a weaselly way to get around it and call it something other than ground source.
A weaselly way. Holly Brown, Northwest Natural Gas Utility out of Portland, Oregon. Thank you for the presentation. Is there help? I'm sure there is. Can you describe how you're helping the building owners, either through modeling or financial incentives on your district, to actually sign up and make the transition needed? When we did the tour yesterday, I didn't even really think about that practicality. And then really quick to the guy in the back that asked about the second owner, if you look up an organization called Earth Advantage, they're out of Portland, Oregon, and they're actually working on all of that at a federal level through the Green Building Registry and working out special loan programs with Freddie and Fannie Mac. I used to be on their board. I'm not now, so I don't know current, but Earth Advantage, they're pretty amazing.
So Holly, I think companies like mine, right, and competitors of mine are going out there and doing these energy assessments of the facilities to find out what can be done. And you're making that conversion to geothermal a component of the engagement, right? Saying, hey, if you want to be an off-taker, I'm going to do all your windows, building envelope, automation, that stuff. And then geothermal becomes a component of an off-taker when it's ready and available. So if they don't want to do it, great, but we're doing those assessments as the private partner in this process.
Steve Hamster, Gray Edge Group. With regards to the wastewater, maybe two angles to think about.
I just remembered the angle, but go ahead.
Well, the first is wastewater collection system is a ginormous horizontal heat exchanger with the earth. It's buried. It's transferring thermal energy between the wastewater and the surrounding soil all the time, whether it's the water's warmer or cooler. And as we take heat in and out of that wastewater, it gets back to a medium. You know, it flows miles to a wastewater plant. So it's a huge earth couple. Second is we'll often do hybrid systems where we combine wastewater energy transfer with vertical closed loop, and the wastewater energy transfer system provides an essential function of charging the vertical closed loop thermal battery. And so it's still getting BTUs in and out of the ground. I know it doesn't say in the bill, but those are the two engineering approaches that I would consider. I would love to hear if there's a third.
So I do have a third. So this kind of goes back to, you know, when I was talking about 284 tons and 445 tons. If I find a client that is willing to go hand in hand with me, we will defend you to the death on the technique. But we're both going eyes wide open that there's risk. So we'd be glad to march with you as long as we believe what you're saying. So those are two great ones. The other one is thermal storage. So there's a now tax credit for thermal storage. And so we looked at a system, and there's a heat exchanger in the middle of that system. And we thought, well, maybe we can define that under the current definition that is thermal storage. But the risk there, and once again, we'd be hand in hand, the risk there is that IRS at some point might come out with thermal storage guidance that's in excess of what the law is. The law's guidance, I think we fit into thermal storage for the law's guidance, but there's some point where IRS might give additional guidance, and that's where there's concern, where they might go left when we wanted them to go right.
If there's time, you can ask a second question. Or you can just meet them up there.
Thank you. Bob Fishman, Sustainable Promise. Donovan, as you've been talking about regulation on district systems, I wonder if you have any insight as to where the Public Service Commission sits on this topic, and you know, if you create a district loop on the public right-of-way, does that then make it a natural monopoly that should be regulated by the Public Service Commission?
All I can say is DPS is looking into it. I honestly don't know.
Mike.
Mike Pioja with the New York Power Authority. I think each one of you guys could answer this question, but what's your biggest barrier you've seen to pencil out a project financially and logistically?
I think timing in a lot of cases is the off-takers. It's, you know, community solar. If somebody doesn't sign up or they're not ready for it, you go down the street, you go out of the state, but in a geothermal loop, you have a small segment of customers, all of having different construction timeframes than us. And so I think the pro forma looks fantastic, but it's when it starts looking fantastic becomes difficult. If everybody signed up tomorrow, it looks great. But if you're staggering 2 or 3 years down the road, it really changes the dynamics of that, which is where lenders start to get a little squirrely on wanting to lend the money up front.
Yeah, we have a couple of slides on that.
We might have it up there.
I mean, I second that as well, but I think from a municipality standpoint, there's a lot of buy-in issues. It's not easy to get a deal like this across because we deal with potholes. We deal with like people getting their garbage picked up. Like we get yelled at for all that kind of stuff. And then now you're going to ask, a municipality who's probably understaffed, we are, that, we need you guys to start working on this geothermal project. Like I was fortunate to basically be able to work with a boss who's cool with that, like who's okay with that. But I think in a lot of municipalities, the last thing they're going to want to do is start thinking about this. And I think it's really about messaging and sort of how this can actually be an economic development project. I think that's really important for people to understand. And that's one thing that I think a lot of people are going to have to get through.
The thing that happens with us is, imagine you're in a time machine and you go forward into the future 2 years. 2 years from now, nobody's going to be concerned about the tax credit, calculating the tax credit, whether people are going to get the tax credit. There's going to be this future date where all the rules are out and people will be very confident. Right now, our issue is lots of people are worried that, guidelines might change things. Or what I'll tell you is these credits are real. And I think a lot of people think that all T's are going to be crossed for you and all I's are going to be dotted for you shortly. That doesn't happen in tax ever. You're going to get some guidance, but every moment you're in with tax, you're going to have things that are still unknown and uncertain. So you do the best you can. You take a conservative approach and you take the tax credit that's presented to you in the rule set that exists at that time. So like, for example, 179D, we're going to talk about it tomorrow. 179D came out in August of 2005. We didn't have rules for some of it until 2008, okay? 3 years later. We were still taking tax deductions between 2005 and 2008. You just have to go with the rules that you have and then make sure you have a tax partner that's going to stand with you to fight that those incentives are yours.
I'll say the last thing to close it out. 2 years ago, the term clean thermal energy networks didn't exist. No one was talking about it. And here we are. So barriers, we're breaking them down. And I'm amazed, truly amazed at how quickly this has taken off. And yeah, the success of PON 4614, but also the UTENJA, Utility Thermal Energy and Networks and Jobs Act, and just the attention that's being given to thermal energy networks. So we've come a long ways in a very, very short period of time. And everything's proving out. Technically, it's feasible. Financially, it can pencil out. So the barrier is now capacity. Contractor capacity, workforce training. I see John here. We need people to be able to do this now. The worst thing you could have is to have demand and not have the people to do it. So we're getting the projects lined up. We now need to get the workers and the drillers.
I have one question. I've been silent all day. If I may. Jacob, the map that you showed of the brownfields are all in the western half of the state, or southern and Pennsylvania. If there was a hypothetical capital of the state and there was a hypothetical former coal plant that fed a steam coal to fire steam to make steam for air conditioning for this capital, would that not be an energy community?
So if you're closing a coal plant, it's an energy community. The key is the date. So was there a coal plant in? It was before 2010. So that's the issue. Unfortunately, they picked 2010 for some reason. For coal mines, they picked 2000.
Okay, so that's the disconnect. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Okay, with that, happy hour. So thank you so much, panel.